What is up, theology nerds? This is Trip, and you're listening to the Homebrewed Christianity podcast. That's right. This is the podcast where we bring you excellent, zesty, ideological ingredients so you can brew your own faith. And today on the podcast, we have a return guest all the way back from episode 5, like over 1,000 episodes ago. But he's dropped in the meantime. But one of the OG guests, almost 10 years ago, John Dominic Crossan is on the podcast. He's talking about his brand new book that he published with his wife Sarah, Resurrecting Easter, how the West lost in the East, like the Eastern Church, kept the original Easter vision. It's just always exciting to have Dominic Crossan, or Dom, back on the podcast. The book is excellent. Here's the thing. You know, if you listen to this podcast, that I've really enjoyed getting to talk to John Dominic Crossan before. This book is special because it's not him doing historical Jesus research or introducing biblical studies or something like that to the masses. This is a book because of his travels with his wife and the Borgs across like Turkey and Israel and such. He starts to notice patterns and habits in art. And so the book is like biblical studies, yes, but also theological accounts of Easter in the Eastern Church and the Western Church, and an argument for a much bigger communal, universal vision of Easter coming out of the East, based in the earliest art we have of the Easter event. The other thing about the book is it comes in hardcover and has lots of beautiful pictures in it. So let's say you're a progressive Christian. Let's just say that. And you have family members that aren't. I'm not pointing fingers that some of you may have recently moved to North Carolina after being gone 10 years in California, and all of a sudden you have family members coming over with slightly judgmental eyes towards you and your religious location. But if you drop a book out that says Resurrecting Easter on it, and on the front of it has this beautiful old art, they go, oh, this is good. They open it. They aren't going to read a book. That's not usually what fundamentalists do. They look at the pictures, and they see pictures, really old pictures of Jesus and Adam and Mary and Eve and everybody getting pulled out of hell or Hades. And they're like, this is old, so it's Christian. It's none of that newfangled stuff, you know. So that's just a side benefit of this book. Okay? A side benefit. Anyway, so before we jump into the interview, I just want to tell you one thing. You could win the book for free. Not just that, but over $500 worth of books from the Westar Institute. That's like the people that do the God Seminar and the Jesus Seminar. They're giving away over $500 worth of books and some amazing ideological classes and such to our listeners. So just go onto the Facebook page of Homebrewed Christianity or the Twitter, and we have links there, or you go to the page for this post and enter the giveaway. And not just one person, but 3 different people are going to win over $500 worth of resources. And we're not talking just John Dominic Crossan books or Marcus Board books. We're talking Jack Caputo. Some Jack Caputo books. We're talking about Catherine Keller books. What? Did you say JC just Catherine Keller and JC Jack Caputo? If Caputo and Keller are in the giveaway, then it's almost ridiculous not to enter it. And here's the thing. When you enter the giveaway, you'll be able to tweet, Facebook, share it, and all that stuff. And anyone else that uses your link to enter it, you get 3 more entries. So, you know, sharing is caring. That's how the giveaway works. All right? And I want to give a shout out to the Westar Institute for saying, we would like to give books to people that listen to Homebrewed Christianity. You know? They didn't say we want to give books to people that listen to Homebrewed Christianity who already agree with what we're doing. They didn't say we're not going to give you books to give away because it's really hard for you to pass on voting with colored beads jokes, which it is. It is. It's hard for me to pass on it. But Jack Caputo has made voting with colored bead jokes. I have to say mine came out first. But I'm just saying, so you can even be a part of the God Seminar if you've made voting with bead that have colored jokes in it. That's how open and affirming the West Star Institute is. If you are not a nerd and have no idea what the Jesus Seminar is, it was a collection of scholars back in the 80s into the 90s who were historical Jesus scholars that created a whole community, a whole group, a whole movement that not only did the hard work of going through the text and trying to make decisions based on historical criticism and such, they also did something that, whether or not you agreed with them, was awesome. They popularized academic study of the New Testament. That's right. A lot of people that disagree with them have whole careers writing books saying that the Jesus Seminar people are wrong. And if you just read both books, you've been invited into an amazing conversation that has leveled up the nerdiness past what it was before people decided to do something seemingly obvious, like popularize scholarship so the masses gets to and be invited into a critical yet faithful reflection of what it means to be a Christian, to wrestle with the text and the tradition and history and all the best knowledge and wisdom we have to gain right now today. The West Star Institute pioneered that back in the day. They're doing it again today. And you can find out more about that, and win some free books. All right? That's all I was going to say. Along with the fact that the birthday of homebrewed Christianity is nearing. We're turning 10 years old. And for the 10th birthday of homebrewed Christianity, we're having Theology Beer Camp, the birthday edition. We're going to be doing it in August in Asheville, North Carolina, craft beer capital of the East Coast. A couple of my friends are already planning on being there. I'd tell you who they were, but I want you to go to theologybeercamp.com. And on the actual birthday of homebrewed Christianity, like on the very day that the podcast was first launched, 10 years ago, on that day, we're going to be releasing for 48 hours the tickets, the cheapest super early bird tickets for the Theology Beer Camp 10th birthday edition. That's right, on March 13th, 14th, and 15th, you can get the super early bird tickets, those 48 hours. I guess it's more like 72. All right, whatever. I know how many hours are in a day, but I'm just saying that for those few days, you can get the super early bird tickets unless it sells out, because this Homebrewed Christianity Theology Beer Camp birthday party is in a freaking brewery. They're going to be brewing with me, or I'm going to be brewing with them because it is their job. We're going to be brewing some amazing specialty beers delivered in-house throughout the event. So when you get your ticket, you're not just securing 3 days of audiological in the flesh nerdiness. You're securing the taste of Asheville beer scene and event only in that brewery delicious beers. You're going to be a part of a whole host of things that I can't even tell you yet because they're secrets. The details of Theology Beer Camp have yet to be released. More of the people that are going to be a part of it, and more of the details of the event will be released, all in due time. But currently, you can see what happens on the first day. And the first few friends of the podcast that are going to be at Theology Beer Camp this August. All right? Before we hop in, I just want to say thank you to Jacqueline, who is a new Homebrewed Christianity deacon. She went to the homebrewedcommunity.com. She went to homebrewedcommunity.com and became a deacon. She is not only supporting the podcast every month, but she's making it possible for you. Yeah, that's right. You know the 70,000 of you that don't donate every month? Jacqueline does. And you know who else? Sigmund. His last name's not Freud, but it could have been, because Siggy and I both like smoking cigars and asking long questions and stuff. Anyway, Siggy, he's an acolyte. He donates every month. He went to homebrewedcommunity.com. And last but not least, Ezra. What? Is Ezra coming back as a name? I hope so. It's like biblical. There's also a character in the Star Wars universe named Ezra. And it looks cool. 4-letter names that pop, like Ezra. You don't think of Ezra as an underachiever, but you don't think of Ezra as boring either. Ezra, I've never met you, but I hope you come to Theology Beer Camp. But Ezra's an elder. Ezra's giving every month, making it possible, and being a part of all the online stuff. And Ezra went to homebrewedcommunity.com. So thank you, Ezra. All right, here we go. John Dominic Crossan. We're talking about Easter. We're talking about art because he wrote a book, Resurrecting Easter. And for some reason, you haven't entered the giveaway, so you could be one of the 3 lucky people to get $500 worth. It's actually more than that. Of goods from West Star Institute. Do it. Do it, do it, do it, do it, do it. Peace. Hello, Homebrewed Christianity listeners. This is Trip, and as we near the 10th birthday of the podcast, it is just a thrill to have the guest on episode 5, Dom Crossan, back on the podcast, talking about his new book, Resurrecting Easter, and a whole stack of other things probably related to the Bible, Jesus, and such. So, Dom, tell me, I know you've spent a lot of time leading ministers and people interested in faith across the Middle East and different areas. You and your wife have done a lot of traveling and teaching at the same time. Tell the story of where the birth of a book on resurrection came, because if you just see the cover and then you see Crossan on it, it could really ruin your progressive street cred.
Right. Most books begin, I have a clear idea. I take it to my editors and they approve or disapprove. And I know what I'm doing. In this case, the book did not begin that way at all. What happened was in 2000, Marcus Borg and Marianne Borg invited us to be co-leaders with them, take 40 people every year in the footsteps of Paul around Turkey. That's where it started. Now, we were there because of Paul. We were not there because of Eastern Christianity or anything else. But even when you go to Turkey to see Paul, you're not going to skip places like Cappadocia or Istanbul, because that would be awful. Mm-hmm. We started to run into an image. Now, I'd like to keep this as vague as possible. I wouldn't even call it the genesis of a book. A mild curiosity in Cappadocia about why, for example, when you go into a church and it has all the scenes that you and I would expect, the Annunciation, you recognize the baptism of Jesus, you recognize everything except after the crucifixion, when you're expecting to see Jesus coming out of the tomb as we see him in Western, you have this strange picture. Now, the first time we saw it in Cappadocia, in the dark church in Goreme, I don't want to make this as, the revelation. This was mild curiosity. Cappadocia is such a strange place that everything is strange there. Lunar landscape from the volcanoes. This church is built inside the tuff, the volcanic rock. So that's extraordinary enough. But fair enough. We see this image. It is Christ. That's clear enough. He has the cruciform halo, which you expect. And it says actually Jesus Christ on there. He's carrying a cross in his left hand. But with his right hand, he's taking Adam and Eve out of Hades. Not hell now, Hades. Mm-hmm. And poor old Hades, who's the guardian keeper of the realm of the dead, is getting trodden on. He's liberating humanity from death itself. Now, mild curiosity, Trip at the very most. And, the next day we're somewhere else, and we almost forgot it till we got to Istanbul. And in the Kora, now the Kora Museum, once the Kora Church, we have the magnificent image which is on the cover of the book. Still, I don't think more than, is this, twice? I mean, we were involved in so many other things, but then every year we started going back to Turkey, of course. And as long as we were going back, in any case, to the Middle East, we started going, now with some deliberation, curiosity at least, not still thinking of a book at all, really not. But curiosity about this image, which is so different, but so consistently. We went to Serbia, we went to Romania, we went to Italy, of course, into Syria. We were in Syria in 2010. We managed to get in the last year before it became impossible. Couple of times to Russia, Egypt, we finally get it. This is Eastern Christianity's image of Easter, period. It's all over it. It's not just a weird thing in some one place. So probably it was, I'd say it was 2013 when we began to think, I think we might have a book. And the important thing at that point was I personally had no intention of writing about the theology of Eastern Christianity. I don't like to write about what I don't know anything about. I'd have had to start all over again from scratch. What I did have was a massive collection of Sarah's photography. Even when we didn't know what we were taking, Sarah is a marvelous. I'm usually talking to people and explaining, and she takes pictures of everything in sight. Sometimes you come back with 9 and 10 gigabytes of pictures. So we started going through them and realizing we had something here. And then we began to realize as well, this Eastern tradition is totally different from the Western tradition that we're all used to. In the Western tradition, Jesus is coming out of the tomb. He's magnificent, he's glorious, he's triumphant, but he's absolutely alone. Nobody's coming out with him. Mm-hmm. The soldiers may, sleep and see nothing, or they may look up and see everything, but he's alone. Whereas in the Eastern tradition, he's taking Adam and Eve, which of course represent all of humanity, mm-hmm. taking humanity out of death. So without contrasting and saying better or worse, the first intuition was there are two radical different images of Easter. That's not true of any of the others. If you look at an Eastern crucifixion and a Western crucifixion, you'll see differences, of course, creative differences. But you'd have no difficulty recognizing it. If you look at the birth of Jesus, well, the East might have him having a bath as well, and the West doesn't. But basically, every other image of Jesus, East and West, is more or less the same until you get to the most important of them all, the resurrection, and these are radically different. Not just minor difference, because we call one the individual resurrection, meaning Jesus alone, the other the universal resurrection, because he's taking Adam and Eve out with him. So that was the basis. Now, the next thing we had to do was talk to our editors and say, look, this is not a text illustrated with a few nice photos. The whole point of this text depends on the images. That's why Sarah's name is on the cover. Mm-hmm. It's not there just for domestic tranquility or to keep everyone happy. It's there because it was her. Without her images, I have nothing to say. So once we saw her images, we had to ask them, are you willing to do a book where you don't stick these color images at the back or the center to save money? Are you willing to spread 140 images about through the entire book, one or two a page almost, so that people can see, say, figure 20, and right there will be the picture. So the argument is based on the images, and the text is to explain the images. And then finally, after people have absorbed the images, as it were, to ask two crucial questions, interpretive questions. I mean, the images are facts. Mm-hmm. We haven't selected them. They're all over the place. We even went, we found out we needed manuscript images that we couldn't get ourselves without permission from the Vatican Library or from Mount Athos. I had to go to Mount Athos by myself to get certain images because they're not available. You have to go there and then get permission to publish them and everything else. So anyway, we finally got all of that. And they said, yes, we put it out the way you want it. So the argument is going to be in the images. Now, the interpretation. This is the interpretation. Which of those two visions, the individual resurrection or the universal resurrection, they're both images, icons, whatever you want to call them, which is in greater continuity with the New Testament? Put crudely, bluntly, if you ask Paul, now Paul, you could draw a picture of a crucifixion because you've seen them. Draw a picture of the actual moment of the resurrection. Don't tell me about the visions. No, not about he appeared to Peter, he appeared to James, all the stuff you have in 1 Corinthians 15. Those are fine. Those are results, consequences, effects. All very valid. I want you to draw the moment, the instant of the crucifixion, just like you might for the transfiguration or the ascension. Why on earth do they come up with two of them, first of all? Mm-hmm. And which is a greater continuity? And I think the Eastern one, the Eastern vision, not surprisingly in a way because Jerusalem is East, is in greater continuity with the New Testament. That's the first major interpretation. That's like, what do you get from all of this? If all the book says is, hey, it's different in the East from here.
Yeah.
That's like, okay, blah. That's the factual basis. So that's the first interpretation. The second one is even more important. So these would be chapters 12 and 13 of the book, of the last chapters, whatever they are. What's the meaning of it? If you simply look at an image and you see Christ, you recognize him, he has the cruciform halo and he's carrying the little cross in his left hand, and you maybe see his wounds. So this is the historical Jesus, the crucified one. Mm-hmm. But he's taking Adam and Eve, totally mythical or parabolic characters, out of Hades, which is the place of death, which is totally mythical. So you've got a scene there in which an historical figure is transcendently involved with mythical figures. And I'm simply asking, this is the pair, what does that mean? Mm-hmm. Not whether you believe it, whether you accept it. What is communicated with that? In the same way as you look at any image today, as it were in advertising, and you look at a great athlete, let's say, getting in and out of a Buick, let's say. Mm-hmm. And all right, I get it. This is an argument. You should buy a Buick. I get the message. I get the meaning. So in this case, the question of meaning is this. Jesus is the crucified one. And as the crucified one, he lives for nonviolent resistance to Roman violence. And he's executed for that. He's not executed for patting babies on the head or telling little parables. Rome executed violent revolutionaries by gathering the leader and all the followers and putting all the crucifixions in a nice big row. Mm-hmm. When they're like Barabbas is going to be done. When they're dealing with a non-violent revolutionary, they go for the leader. They pick off the leader. And then if you're still at it 5 years from now, we pick off your next leader till you get the message. So I know from Pilate alone that Jesus is a non-violent revolutionary. So this non-violent revolutionary is saving, liberating, if you prefer, the human race from death. Now, the only way I can read that to make any sense to me, even before I get to the point of saying I accept or reject, just to understand the image, is that the human race, that means leave Adam and out of it for the moment, that's our species, Homo sapiens, 70,000 years out of Africa, and how are we doing, as it were? I see a trajectory of violence across our human species. By that, I simply mean that we're not getting more evil. It's just we're getting more dangerous ways of destroying ourselves. For example, it only took us 3,000 years to get from the iron sword to the atom bomb. Mm-hmm. We're really good at a lot of things, to be fair. We improve a lot of things, but we've improved violence too. We've got much, much better at it, to the point that it endangers our species and our world. So I see this image as saying, like a message, dear human race, the only thing that can save you from the trajectory of escalatory violence in which you are trapped is nonviolent resistance. I kind of take it out of the scene and put it almost in abstract language. But put in abstract language, I'm getting a very clear message. Now I have to decide, I think that's rubbish. Or I think that might be the destiny of the human race.
Yeah, and it's, I think like when you wrestle with it at the end, like one of the things I noticed about the book is regardless of your initial response to the commentary and everything as you're going through the pictures themselves seize you, and you can see that there's a conversation as a Western Christian that the early church was having, which isn't in the cliff notes that you're familiar with. And a lot of the questions we ask about Jesus, the meaning of the resurrection and such, have been informed by a very different art, very different conversation and imagery. And so when you get to this picture of the resurrection as a collective, a communal event where there's a new Adam and a new way of being human that's being offered through faith, it can really be experienced as refreshing, progressive, and historic and conservative in a completely different way you didn't anticipate.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit extraordinary. Even great scholars in the West who write about the resurrection from the Bible, never even mention Eastern Christianity. It's like the picture they have in their mind while they're describing is, of course, our classic one of Jesus arising alone. They may discuss the guards at the tomb, and in the Western tradition, the guards are always either down there having a snooze and seeing nothing, or, as I said, an awake and seeing everything. But at least it would seem to me, if you were talking about the resurrection from the Bible, and by the way, an aside, somebody said to me, oh, so you're giving up biblical studies, now you're going into art history. I was on an interview, so I wasn't allowed to scream. But I really wanted to scream to him, no. This is not art history. It's art theology, first of all. And it really is asking a biblical question. When we read the biblical accounts of the resurrection, of course we're talking about Jesus. And Jesus is a central character in all of these images. He's not just one of the crowd. He's the one grasping the hand of Adam and Eve. Mm-hmm. Of course. But you can't leave out Adam and Eve. There is, I don't know of a single Eastern Christian image in which there isn't at least Adam. There's a few with Adam only. I could count them on one hand that I've ever seen. Almost the very earliest one, around 700, Adam and Eve are in there. Now, you may have other people later, but Adam and Eve are the core. And only Adam and Eve get the hand. He reaches out, and it's I shouldn't say the hand, it's the limp wrist of Adam, because he's been dead for a long time. So he's kind of. So that image of the hand of Christ reaching out and grasping the hand of Adam and Eve is the new creation image, as distinct from, Michelangelo's tiny gap between divinity and humanity. Remember the Sistine Chapel, the tiny gap between the hand of God and the hand of Adam. Now it's like this, no gap. Mm-hmm. It's a magnificent image. And I would ask people just to let the images take over, because that's what they did with us. They eventually took over till we could not see them, as it were. Mm-hmm. Then you're ready to raise the question of meaning.
Mm-hmm. So when you get through this whole process of discovery, writing this book and such, and think back to earlier in your career where the questions around resurrection were kind of set in a Western framework by the Enlightenment, by the quest for the historical Jesus, by comparative different myths and different contexts and such, if you were sitting back at like the first gathering of the Jesus seminar and then you were able to pull out the art, like, what are the questions or ideas you would want to add to that conversation that you didn't discover until you and Marcus and company are traveling around?
Okay, let me start there. Basically, if all you know is the Western image, so those are the images in your head, even if you're talking about the Bible, 1 Corinthians, mm-hmm. These are the images in there. Whether you like it or not, they're in there. We could get easily, and we did, get into a debate. Do you think this is a literal event? Every other single event that you have in these images, the Annunciation, are at least imagined as literary events. You could argue whether the Nativity was this way or that way, but at least you can imagine it. Crucifixion, yes. Oh, yes. Now we come to this one event, and you're imagining the individual resurrection. And I know in the Jesus seminar, the immediate discussion, are we talking about something literal or something metaphorical? I don't remember anyone in the Jesus seminar who would have argued that it was literal, but there were scholars, good scholars, who were arguing if you were there on Easter Sunday morning with a camera crew, as it were, you would have seen this. You could have had a photograph. My own comment on that is that CNN wouldn't see it, but Fox News would probably see it because they see lots of stuff the rest of us can't see. But anyway, but at least it's not an absurd question. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's an absurd question. You could argue, well, everything else is kind of factual. They describe the ascension. They go out to Bethany, the Mount of Olives, and Jesus goes up into the clouds. It sounds literal. You can say it isn't, but it does sound. So we would have got into that argument immediately, literal or metaphorical. And we probably would never have got to the second stage. Okay, if metaphorical, what does it mean? Because it's not enough to say something's a metaphor. That only means, what does it mean? Metaphors. If you say it's literal, all right, that's the end of the discussion. Jesus went from Jerusalem to Jericho. Okay. But if it's metaphorical, so I don't think we would have even got into really seriously discussion of meaning at that stage, because we were blocked immediately by literal or metaphorical. We wouldn't even got it and say, okay, we all agree it's metaphorical. Now, metaphor for what? And then I think what was lacking very often at that stage, as I look back in the discussion, I'm not trying to say I knew more than anyone else. I'm putting myself in this group. We weren't aware of the distinction in Judaism between an ascension and a resurrection. I think very often, for example, in Judaism, it was taken for granted that very holy people like Enoch, like possibly Moses even, or Elijah, could be taken up to God. Mm-hmm. It's an ascension, it's an assumption, it's an apotheosis. And even in the Greco-Roman tradition, they would say, yes, of course, Romulus was taken up to God because he was the founder of the Roman Empire, as it were, and he could appear to people. And they would have said, of course this can happen. They might have said, we don't believe it about your guy. And we might say, we don't believe it about your guy. But it was part of the culture that ascensions or assumptions of very holy people for Judaism, very powerful people for Rome, could be taken up to God. Now, they would not use the word resurrection, because the word resurrection never, ever was individual. Mm-hmm. You could talk of an individual ascension, always individual, actually. There was no corporate ascensions. But if you talk to resurrection, you were talking about at the end of time, everyone will rise up to be judged. And then there might be a heaven and a hell afterwards. And, as I look at that today, I want to say, wait a minute, we got it all backwards. Yes, there is a heaven and a hell. Here on this earth, we're running alternative heaven and hell on this earth. And if you want to look at the last century, hell is winning hands down, of course. Nobody ever imagined terrors of hell worse than we human beings created in the last century. Mm-hmm. Heaven and hell are not places in the future, but options in the present. And yes, there will be a great final judgment of human evolution, not of everyone as an individual, but there will be a final moment when the great experiment called human evolution may come to a terrible end, or may come to a happy outcome. We may end up capable of controlling violence, or we may end up not capable of controlling it. So in one sense, judgment, heaven and hell are not nice little things way off in the future that we kind of forget about. Mythological, non-believable stuff. They are happening every day. Decisions is being made every day, which is moving us in one of those two directions. So that's really what would have been missing in our earliest discussion. Now, the advantage is if you show somebody the two images, the individual, they can get into that argument about literal and metaphorical. If you show them the universal, I don't even understand how you could imagine that literally. Mm-hmm. That would mean that all the tombs up to that point, everyone rose with Jesus, literally. Didn't anyone notice? We're not talking about one empty tomb. So I think you might be able, because some people have taken the individual resurrection literally, but I don't see how they could possibly take the universal metaphor, literally. Those thoughts weren't even there. I mean, we weren't even halfway there, Trip, I don't think.
Well, I mean, it makes me think of how, Matthew's the only gospel that mentions all the dead rising up and running around Jerusalem. And you would think that's ample. That's a high quality thing to mention in all the other gospels if it happened. But that image, I think, really resonates with what you're seeing in the East, in that what's going on when the historical person of Christ is connected to the threat of violence and death that has threatened us all. Even stuff that's already dead freaks out and starts quaking. And that image, like even when people ask that question, like, "Oh, what would a videotape have gotten at Easter?" Like, after reading this, I almost want to respond, "Well, perhaps it would have picked up Jesus, but it definitely wouldn't have seen him pulling Eve and Adam right behind him, and that's the reason we celebrate at sunrise."
Exactly, and if you even focus on that little bit, Matthew obviously is a very Jewish gospel, has a piece of tradition. it reeks of ancient tradition. He knows about the resurrection is supposed to mean other people rising from the dead. Now, how do I get this? He's following Mark's story, as it were, and you can see him trying to fit this into Mark's story, and it's pretty hard to fit it into a story. So he has them kind of rise on Good Friday, but he doesn't know what to do with them until Easter Sunday, our language, of course, because they can't appear before Jesus. So they rise on Friday because the earth is shaken when Jesus' body is laid on the earth, as it were. And up they come, and they're like in a holding pattern. So you can see he knows some tradition, is trying to fit it into a narrative framework. It's not in Mark, of course. It's nowhere else except Matthew, because Matthew puts it in there. So you get, at least in Matthew, you get not a universal resurrection, but at least you get a corporate resurrection. You can't validate an individual resurrection based on Matthew. You have to have at least, a half dozen, 20, 30 holy ones around there. So there's a clue in Matthew that tell you, be careful, there's something else going on here.
How does this impact the way you understand Paul's kind of rereading of the resurrection of the dead, where in the kind of overlapping of the ages and Jesus being like the first fruits, but it makes no sense to talk about him without other fruit?
Exactly. No, that's perfect, because the same expression we saw in Matthew, they call those who have slept. Matthew doesn't talk about those who have died, even if our translation sometimes says it. Those who have slept. It's a special name for those who have died but are going to rise with Jesus. Paul talks about it, as he said, the first fruits of those who have slept. You really can't have a harvest with just first fruits. You can't do it alone. So I'm convinced that Paul, though he wants to emphasize Jesus when he's out talking to Gentiles, who probably won't have a clue what resurrection of the dead mean, but the word that we find on every one of these mosaics and frescoes, anastasis, the Greek word, anastasis, which fascinating, means uprising. I like the political implications of that. It's an uprising, not just getting up from a table, because stasis has a political edge to it. Stasis is an opposition. So anastasis, necron, that's the phrase Paul uses again and again, the anastasis necron, the rising of the dead ones. Sure. And that's where he puts Jesus. He can argue with the Corinthians, if Jesus did not rise, there is no general resurrection. If there's no general resurrection, Jesus did not rise. You'd say, wait a minute, Paul, couldn't Jesus have his own private resurrection? Couldn't there be a resurrection just from Jesus? Paul would look at you and say, but that's not resurrection. Mm-hmm. That's an ascension. If you wanted to argue, and early Christianity could have argued, and Paul could have argued, we've had visions of Jesus, like Enoch or Elijah. He is taken up to God. He lives now with God, and he can appear to us. They would call that ascension. We call that assumption, as I said. Apotheosis, divinatio, all of that fits into the culture. The extraordinary thing is that when they had, and I think they did have visions of Jesus, they said things like, it's the resurrection of the dead. And then Paul goes on to say, he says it in Colossians, you, talking to Christians, have been raised with Christ. Say, wait a minute, shouldn't that be off in the future sometime? No, he's telling his Christians, you are part of this resurrection. Put bluntly, you're supposed to be living risen lives. Mm-hmm. And Paul is quite clear what he thinks a risen life should be. He's pounds the poor Corinthians over the head with it. So the logic of Paul's message is that the general resurrection from Judaism has begun with Jesus. And if I said to him, Jesus alone, he couldn't say that. It wouldn't fit into Jewish theology. He'd probably say, yeah, Jesus and others. And now you are living risen lives into the future.
So when the communal aspect of it and the participatory sense of it, that the resurrection isn't something off and out there, but something you come to participate in and are held in hope. How does this theological reading change the way you understand the reality of God and the world God's relationship to the person of Jesus, but not just his own cross, but all those who've died cross dead. Is the hope of resurrection something about our continued communal transformation in relationship to evil and suffering alone, or is it also a testimony that God has a future for those who died in the bloody bench of human history?
I think so, but we Christians are going to have to take evolution seriously.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not getting into the argument about 13 billion years ago. We all get bogged down in the Big Bang in Genesis 1. I want to talk about, just say, human evolution. When Paul says in Romans that we should be able to know God by creation and by Christ. Now, when I hear creation, I tend to put in evolution. Creation sounds to me a very static word. Evolution. So I think of evolution as like the professional face of God, and Christ is the personal face of God.
Mm-hmm.
So as a Christian, but let's take the first one and emphasize that. We are being given freedom. And if I'm talking to somebody who doesn't believe in God and thinks this is all, I would say, okay, I just want to talk to you about human evolution. Human evolution has created, by whatever means you want, a creature who is free, not controlled by instinct, not controlled in the way that the Serengeti lions won't do stupid things like killing all their gazelles just because they're bored. They'll be controlled by instinct not to do something really stupid. Otherwise, they wouldn't be around. The really stupid ones ain't around anymore. We have only conscience. If we want to go and do a series of things that destroy the earth or destroy ourselves, I do not believe there's some else we can escape to. I don't believe there is another world here below. Mm-hmm. There's not another world out there that we can just go, world's blown up, off we go, parachute. No, I believe in the next life, which is the way this world is going to have to be if it is going to have a future. Yeah, the future life. It comes out of Jewish tradition. It's their vision of how the world should be, going back to Genesis 1 in a way. And I don't know which way it will go. I don't have a safety valve. Mm-hmm. If I look at the record, the hope, of course, is that there are enough people in various ways and from all the world's great religions in different ways, but I'm just talking about Christianity. I'm looking at an early distant warning 2,000 years ago, an image from the last 1,700 years to say, look, this is an image. This is a metaphor. If you want to live this metaphor, then you will make reality. Metaphors create reality. Mm-hmm. In other words, there's nothing more real than a metaphor. Let me take an absurd example. It just comes to mind. When Hitler talked about the 1,000-year Reich, that's a vision, that's a metaphor, that's an image. Okay, we're coming in to live on that, and we know how it ends. Metaphors can be inhumane, can be evil almost. But you're invited to come in to a metaphor, into a parable, and to so live it that you create reality. So if you had asked me, do I think Easter is real? Of course it's real. Mm-hmm. There's nothing more real than a metaphor. If you live it, of course. If you don't, it's just floating in the breeze, as it were.
Yeah, I think there's a sense, especially in a world that continues to be shaped by an Enlightenment reductive account, where even the cosmos, where this evolutionary interplay, it gets read really literalistically, just like some conservative Christians will read the Bible literally, and both the story of evolution and emergence that leads to human life and society and such is flattened, just like we can flatten text. And that's one of the reasons I found the imagery and the pictures so powerful, is because it's straight heresy to deny the Jewish Jesus who died on a cross, and yet the very narrative that you have to interpret the resurrection in the imagery is the story of humanity, with the holding of Adam and Eve, and I think that's like when you re-ask that question, where humans aren't the center of the great chain of being, and the Earth isn't the center of the dynamic story, those images actually become theological launching places for new Christian theology that's connected to the historic church in ways that the Western image has a hard time accommodating. That it's tempted to join a fight where a theist and an atheist yell back and forth at each other and miss the invitation to transformation and resurrection.
Yeah, I would like to say, hold the theism-atheism debate for a moment, and let us talk about human evolution.
Mm-hmm.
Even if I'm talking about, if somebody says, okay, evolution is 6,000 years old. Okay, for the following debate, how are we doing in the last 6,000 years? If you want to say we were all, the dinosaurs were there in the garden and we all patted them on the head, fine. I'm not going to get into that because these are profound red herrings. If we have 6,000 years, it only took us 3,000 to get from the iron sword to the atom bomb. Mm-hmm. We've never created a weapon we didn't use, except maybe you want to argue with the hydrogen bomb, maybe. But basically, we always create ones more violent than the ones before. Now, make a trajectory of that. Here's how we're doing. Like, as if you're looking at a patient whose temperature is going up, 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 up. After 4 days, 99, 100, 101, 102, your fear is it's going to keep going up unless something happens. That's the way I see human evolution. Escalatory violence, I'm hyphenating those words, has gone up steadily. Mm-hmm. Now, what will stop it from keeping going up? It can, because there is another vision. There's another vision in the world. I'm just talking now of the Christian vision, but there's others as well, of course. In fact, I would ask any world religion, what do you have to say about human evolution? Come out of your own language for a moment. Tell me where you see us. Now, if that religion says, well, it's not too bad because no matter what happens here, we're going off to heaven, I have nothing to say to that person. I really don't. All I could say is, would you please bracket heaven for the moment and talk about the earth? And because in Christianity, and Jesus is our Father, he says, as in heaven, so on earth, in the Greek order, as in heaven, so on earth. Could we please talk about the earth? Don't bring in heaven or hell or future lives elsewhere. Let me talk about this. What does your vision say about human evolution and its future, granted the trajectory of its past? So if you could get them to really focus on that. So in a religion, I am able to speak Christian, if I put it that way. I know the Christian tradition. I'm never, ever the least bit embarrassed with anything in the Bible because I understand when it's talking literally, when it's talking metaphorically. But I also can talk without ever mentioning the Bible. Mm-hmm. We could talk about everything we're saying here and talk about human evolution, trajectory of violence, history, and never mention Christ. So I think as Christians, we have to be bilingual, be able to speak our own tradition, because you need to have a powerful tradition. If you're taking on human evolution, you better have a powerful tradition or it'll just swamp you like a bug. But then we also have to have secular language as well. Language for the public square.
Mm-hmm. So do you think that this Eastern image of resurrection and things is something that makes more sense makes more sense of Jesus' Jewish inheritance and doesn't have the kind of dichotomy that developed in the West between kind of this Hellenistic account of Christianity and the Jewish tradition that he inherited?
Absolutely, because I go back to what I said before. It depends on the totally different theological impact of a word like ascension mm-hmm. and a word like resurrection. And we've mixed them up, actually. Strictly speaking, if you take Mark's account of the empty tomb, now we're after the resurrection moment, empty tomb. And if you were a good Hellenistic or a Roman author and you were reading this, and you're probably, scoffing at this, but you're reading it, you would say, well, yeah, we know if you find the empty tomb, that's a claim that somebody has been taken up to God. We know about Romulus. We know our hero founder. So they're telling that their hero founder, Jesus, is just like our hero found a Romulus, and if we catch any of these guys, we're going to execute them. You'd get the message. You might believe it, of course, but you'd get it. Romans understood high treason. They understood if you go around saying Jesus is the Lord, not just our little Lord, but the Lord and the Son of God. Oh, now that's treason. So when Paul says Jesus is not just our Lord, but the Lord. Anyway, so the Romans would have understood it. Okay, you're making a claim that Jesus has ascended to God. Now, any Jew would say, yeah, I understand your claim. You're claiming that as Moses, we don't even know where his burial site is, so maybe he was taken up to God. We know that from Josephus, and we know that from Philo. Okay, we know it. You're claiming that your Jesus is a par with our Moses because he was taken up to God, not left in the tomb. Right? That's what you guys are saying. So as a Jewish theologian, I get that. I wouldn't believe it, but I get it. I don't understand it. Then I'd be, well, why would you call that resurrection? There's no private resurrection. There's no personal resurrection. There's no individual resurrection. The word itself is corporate. The word is communal. The word is universal. In fact, they would not say communal, they'd say universal. So it's, in one sense, it would be quite more in keeping, as it were, with the Jewish tradition to say ascension. We've had visions of Jesus, like Romans claim to have had visions of Caesar and Augustus and of Romulus after their death, and that proves they're with the gods or God. So, all right, we talk ascension. But when you talk about resurrection, you start making claims about the human race. And that's not negotiable in Judaism. It could be quite possible within Judaism that Jesus, as a very holy person, on a par with Moses, would be taken up to God. Ascension. That is possible. And it wouldn't touch the human race. All you would say is, well, maybe if you live like Jesus, you might get the same reward. It'd be like a model. Mm-hmm. When you use resurrection, you're making a universal claim. You're making a universal claim. And you're not making it in the sense of, well, this is it. If you believe literally that Jesus rose from the dead, it's unbelievable. But if you believe the unbelievable, you'll get the same thing. I would call that kind of transcendental snake oil, to be honest with you. I mean, it's about this world. Whatever about the future, leave that aside. Salvation, redemption, liberation, all of these are about this world. That's why it has to be Adam and Eve. And even, if you and I said, before we even thought about this, or myself before we started into the project, okay, two people rise up with Jesus. Who are they? I'd have said, okay, give me a minute. Well, probably Moses and Elijah, like at the Transfiguration. Yeah, maybe Moses and David. I would never in a million years have come up with Adam and Eve. I would have thought maybe two very holy prophets, or after all, it's not Adam and Eve who are with Jesus at the Mount of Transfiguration. So Adam and Eve is the extraordinary thing. That makes a claim about the human race.
Yeah, it's like if it was Moses and Elijah, those are about Christological offices or something like that, or putting Jesus in a narrative with the horizon of Israel as a people. But Adam and Eve ends up inviting this particular story out of the history of Israel to interpret the possibilities and future of humanity.
Yeah, and there, as I said, absolutely are the ones that have to be there. There are others start appearing later. You start getting David and Solomon start appearing along with them. You sometimes get Abel, the first martyr of the Old Testament, John the Baptist, first martyr of the New Testament. Those six can be identified eventually. But the two that can never be left out are Adam and Eve. As I said, you might have a few with just Adam. And they are the only one that get the glad hand. Mm-hmm. You never see David and Solomon or Abel or John the Baptist being grasped by the wrist. So the basic image is of taking the human race from the prison house of death. And that's what requires the two interpretations. How does this sit with the tradition in the New Testament? And what does it mean? And I'm emphasizing meaning because before you can say I believe or I disbelieve, you have to say, what does it mean?
Right.
If you speak to me in Ukrainian, I don't say, oh, I don't believe that. I have to say, I don't understand it. So the first question about these images is, what claim is being made by them? What are they telling us? Then, of course, you can decide. I reject it or I accept it.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk, and your work throughout your career. It's been beneficial to plenty of people in my life, and myself included.
Thank you, Trip, very much. Lovely to be on with you, always.
Oh yeah, and so any things on your horizon for us to be looking for?
No, I'm totally involved in this at the moment. To be honest with you, I've kept myself free to be able to do this, to talk to people about it, because the big plea I'm making about this book is, don't misunderstand. I don't mean you. Don't think, oh, this is a nice picture book. Lovely pictures in here. Crossan's going into art history. Look at the pictures. Ask yourself the two questions. Which is in greater continuity with the New Testament, or Western or the Eastern tradition? And then what does it mean? Mm-hmm. What the hand of Christ meeting the hand of Adam and Eve mean?